Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you for your patience. My name is Ajmal Sitar. I am the CEO and founder of Small Economy Works, as well as the former co-chair of the Social Finance Forum and former co-chair of the Social Innovation Social Finance Co-Creation Group and a member of the current Social Innovation Advisory Council. I'm calling in today from the Yukon in Canada's Arctic in the north, and have spent the past couple of days off grid working with our team on innovative solutions. And one of our key lessons that we learned from a lot of the elders that spoke to us is to flow with the energy. And so we're where we're supposed to be. This is when we are supposed to start. And so I'm really excited to introduce you to a distinguished panel of experts, each of whom brings a unique perspective to our topic. First, we have Stephen Miller from Power to Change, calling in from the UK. And I met recently, and he shared some incredible stories around community finance and how community is gathering to leverage innovative tools to impact their communities in different ways. And he'll talk to us a little bit about that and the tools that they're using and why place-based investing.
Great,
we also have Sally Miller from the Fair Finance Fund, who's doing some incredible work around the country and communities and utilizing innovative financial tools to impact agriculture and other industries within our space. And finally, we have Aditi Basdeo coming to us with a lot of experience with youth and sharing her story and some of the experiences that she's had within place-based investing and within this space. So we're going to start with short presentations from each of our speakers. And from there will be an opportunity for the rest of you, which I can't see, which is kind of weird, I'll be honest with you. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions to the panel or join the panel and share your own story in relation to a certain question. So we'll jump right into it now. Very excited about this session. And we'll be starting with Stephen Miller.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's good to see you again, and it's nice to be part of this this festival. So I'll just talk a bit more about who I am and who Power to Change are first, and then sort of talk about why we think place-based investing is important, and why we think it should be a consideration in the sort of wider social finance sector. So a little bit about me first. I'm Director of Delivery and Impact at Power to Change, and I've worked in the UK third sector for about 18 years, specialising in community development, social enterprise and social investment. So I've been sort of in and around the space for a while. And Power to Change is sort of a relatively young organisation in the sort of grand scheme of things. So it's we're an independent charitable trust that was set up in 2015 with a £150 million endowment from our national lottery. So they have a national lottery community fund. And we exist primarily to help communities use the power of business to transform where they live. And the way we do that is through supporting and promoting the community business model. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that is in a second. But to date, we funded and invested over £106 million into the various communities we work with. And about 2/3 of that money has gone into the 30% most deprived neighbourhoods in the country. So place is a really important aspect of how we work, and it's also a key feature of how community businesses operate. So community businesses are locally rooted organisations. They're trading for the benefit of their local community, and they're also accountable to that local community. And it's the place-based nature of them and the sort of accountability mechanism, which I think distinguishes them from maybe other forms of social enterprise that you might be more familiar with. And they can be any type of business that trades products or services. So They can be shops, it can be community-owned transport, it can be farms, hubs, pubs, gardens, leisure centres, you name it, as long as it's run by local people for the benefit of their local community. And this is really a growing movement across the country. And, there's hundreds and thousands of people currently working to improve the areas where they live. They might be buying the last pub in the village, or running their local football club, or saving public halls or their local libraries. And there's about 11,000 of these community businesses in England at the moment. That's about double the number from when Power to Change first formed. So in terms of why we think place is important, and why place-based investing is important, I think there are sort of five reasons I'd give for why we are supportive of it and have adopted it as a model and a focus. So the first is around local empowerment, and that's partly due to, I guess, the contextual nature of operating in the UK. So the UK has larger geographical differences than many other developed countries on a range of measures. So there's huge regional disparities in terms of productivity, pay, educational attainment, health outcomes, a whole range of sort of measures. And as well as these geographical disparities, there's also the UK is also a highly centralised state, which means that political power is concentrated, particularly at the national level. And the sort of combined effect of those two things means that communities can be sort of inhibited and disempowered from addressing the challenges that they face in their local areas. And there's lots of research that shows that many communities in the UK are feeling or have felt left behind. And so part of what we do as Power to Change is really actively engage with local communities to identify their needs, aspirations and challenges, and think about the right types of finance and support to help them exercise greater control and influence over what happens in their area. So in terms of how that relates to investing, one of the key financial instruments we support is a financial tool called Community Shares. And they're a way for community businesses, but also cooperatives, to raise finance from individual investors in order to help them develop and grow. They take a slightly different form from the shares that you might be more familiar with, in that they can't be sold, traded or transferred between members. And they also infer, membership rights, or like a stake in the governance of the organisation. But all members are only entitled to one vote. So regardless of how many shares you hold, you can only hold one vote. And this is all about democratising ownership and influence. So one of the ways that we support that is that we run a match funding program. So there's lots of ways we support it, but I'll use this particular example. So, for communities that are particularly interested in using community shares to take over local buildings or assets, we will often offer some match funding if they can raise X pounds from their local community. And to date, our investment of 3.5 million has helped communities raise an additional 12.3 million from their local community and residents, democratizing ownership and governance in the process. So that's one way in which we support local empowerment, and we think that's important for other investors to consider. And then the second consideration for us is around adopting a holistic approach, so really thinking about the whole place. So, when we think about community development, we're really recognizing a sort of interconnectedness between social, economic and environmental factors. And so we often fund projects and businesses that address multiple dimensions of community well-being. So thinking about those connections between affordable housing, sustainable energy, local food systems, which Sally may be able to talk more about, and also obviously job creation. Sometimes this happens all within the same neighbourhood, and there's a great example in the southwest of England, in the city of Plymouth, where there's a community business called Nudge Community Builders, who've been taking this community-led approach to regenerating a particular street there called Union Street. And that used to be a really thriving area until maybe the early 2000s, and they really hit hard times after the 2008 recession, and in the following years, the number of vacant shops and properties was quite high. So about 25% of the land there was lying empty, all along that one street, and much of the property there was either boarded up or it's falling into disrepair, and that's partly to do with the predominant economic model for property in the UK. So it's a complex mix of property as investment portfolio, and there are multiple owners, many of which lived outside the city, potentially even outside the country, and didn't have a long-term investment in that place. So what Nudge have been trying to do is bring those buildings back to life and move them into community ownership. And so, with our support, they've already brought back 3 buildings on the street into community use, including a shopping arcade, which now houses 17 small businesses. And they've also brought recently bought a building called the Millennium Building, which had previously been empty for about 15 years, and which also holds sort of, significant cultural value for locals in the neighborhoods. And the Millennium Building used to have a dance hall, a roller disco, it had a much loved nightclub. So it's really an important space for the community to reopen. And the financing for all of that redevelopment and regeneration has been varied. And so in the beginning it was more likely to be grant, and but as they sort of matured and developed their property portfolio, our investments have included a mix of debt and grant, which we refer to as blended finance, and has enabled us to work alongside other social investors to support communities like this to bring these properties back to life and back into community hands. And so that links to my sort of third point, which is around community ownership. And so we obviously foster community ownership. It's one of the key things that we're interested in as an organisation, primarily because we see it as a way to redistribute wealth and power and correct some of the market failures that previously let places down. So to use another example, there's a sort of lovely pub called the Angler's Rest in the village of Bamford, which sits in Hope Valley, which is at the heart of the Peak District in the middle of the country. And it's a very picturesque location, which means that people are often passing through, going climbing or hiking or cycling in the peaks. But unfortunately, like a lot of rural areas in the UK, the village has also experienced a sort of long-term decline in social infrastructure. And so, there's spaces and places where they can sort of meet and connect with each other. And, one of the most important places in any British community is undoubtedly the pub. But the Angler's Rest pub had sort of been opening and closing sporadically over many years, itself a victim, I think, of the financialized and leveraged operating model that means that large breweries in this country often will desert an area if the pub isn't turning over a big enough profit, leaving the pub building itself further vulnerable to speculation from property developers who, over the years have converted many pubs across the country into residential properties, losing them to the community forever. And, at the moment in the UK, there's about 18 pubs a week closing. So this is a serious, sort of systemic challenge. And so the Angler's Rest was saved from closure in 2011 when 300 people from that rural community all pulled their money together to buy it. And now it's like a thriving, invaluable hub for that village, and it offers a range of different amenities and services, including a cafe, as well as a post office, as well as obviously creating employment opportunities for local people. And so what I like about this example is that previously extractive ownership and investment model that doesn't really care about long-term investment in place has been flipped on its head, and instead there's a long-term commitment to both the place and the business as well. So the final 2 sort of points around how all of this serves to sort of catalyze local economies, and why that's important for a consideration for investing in places. And a lot of the community businesses we support generate economic activity ranging from retail to hospitality to even to community-owned renewable energy projects. And all of that activity has a key function in redistributing power and wealth. And so our evidence shows that for every pound spent by a community business, 56 pence stays within the local economy, helping to retain and build wealth within that community. And that compares to only about 40 pence for larger private sector firms, which I think is characteristic of this extractive economic model that the UK shares with many other advanced economies. And so the final point there is about how this contributes to long-term resilience and sustainability. And so we really think about how our investments and grants really enhance the resilience and sustainability of places long-term. And so we think about that in economic terms, we think about it in social terms, but we also think about it in environmental terms. One of our biggest investments to date has been in a project called CORE, which stands for Community Owned Renewable Energy. And that's a £37 million social investment partnership between us and Big Society Capital. And through CORE, we've sort of utilised our capital to develop, refinance and acquire 8 solar farms across the country that were either privately owned or were in other forms of ownership but were in distress. And that portfolio has a combined capacity of about 39 megawatts per annum, which is about equivalent to powering about 6,000 homes, so the size of a sort of small town. And that initiative and that idea about buying up privately held assets and transferring them into community hands is one of the first of its kind, and it's been hopefully being like really successful. So because we were just in the final stage now of the community share raises to transfer those assets fully into community hands, but that will make quite a significant contribution to the sort of energy resilience and sovereignty of those communities for the longer term, as well as boosting the percentage of the UK's sort of community solar capacity that's in community hands quite significantly. So I offer these as examples of what's possible when you're thinking about long-term investment in places, and also the mechanisms through which that is delivered. And to summarise, I think the reasons why I think place-based investing is important around supporting that local empowerment. So really think about how you push power down to the neighbourhood level and facilitate agency. Adopting a holistic approach which supports the sort of long-term resilience and sustainability of a place. For us, it's thinking about how you democratise ownership and redistribute wealth. Again, creating long-term investments in both places and the businesses within those places, as well as then catalysing local economies and ensuring that wealth is both generated and retained locally. And I think all of this supports that triple bottom line approach to drive, social, environmental, and financial returns. And for us, it's about identifying novel ways to address the complex challenges that we're all facing at a local level. So hopefully that's been a bit of a sort of helpful overview. And I'll pass back to our hosts, and then happy to take any questions later on.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephen. It's very apparent that you've had some tremendous experiences, and I always like hearing about them. And as we know, the UK's sector or space is a little bit more mature than ours, and so it's very important and fascinating to learn about how you've progressed. And there's an opportunity for real exchange here. For us to learn from you in terms of what's gone really well, and what frameworks and tools have worked the best, and where you may have maybe taken a different direction. So we'll get to that in the Q&A, but before we get to that, we'll move to Canada. I imagine a lot of the viewers today are from Canada, and we're very lucky to have Sally Miller, who is the Executive Director of the Fair Finance Fund. She's worked in sustainable food and agriculture management, development research for nonprofits and co-ops for over 30 years, including the local food and farm co-ops, Toronto Public Health, Wilfrid Laurier University, Ontario Natural Food Co-op, Organic Meadows, and many, many more. And so thank you so much for joining us here today, Sally. And I look forward to sharing with us your perspective on why place-based investing. What are the tools that are working? How do you do community engagement? how does it look differently in maybe rural or northern communities? And how do you see the future of this space and how it extrapolates outwards for more individuals to participate within uh, the arena that you keep busy in?
So those are great questions. I still have 7 minutes only, right? Um, so, so I did want to start, Stephen, by saying it's such a treat to share this space with you because I've been promoting and poaching from your model for a long time. Um, and so the community shares model is so powerful, and just to hear that it's continuing to make that kind of change is really exciting. Um, and so a little bit on where the Fair Finance Fund came from. We, uh, as Ajmal said, I had been working for 30 years, both sort of research and then business management, usually co-op management in the food and agriculture sector, including organic farm co-ops and things like that. Um, and I was consistently finding that these really important businesses that are often the future food producers in Canada, the people that we are relying on to as the biggest sector in the economy, can't get the capital they need. And that's particularly if they're organic or if they're young or if they're BIPOC. So this is sort of barriers that are piling up and happening at the same time that 75% of Canadian farmers will be retiring this decade, if they're allowed to retire and don't have to just drop dead on their tractor. So we have a major transition going on in agriculture, and it's moving in a very exciting direction. So more sustainable, more new young farmers, and those are exactly the people who couldn't get capital. So we started the Fair Finance Fund. But looking at things like the community shares, I'm like, oh, we can't do that here, but do something like that. So the Fair Finance Fund is a nonprofit. We did a lot of research in 2018 to make sure this was really needed and what people needed and what the shape of it should look like. So we actually went to the community from the very beginning going, if we were going to do this, how would it need to be shaped? And then we got right to it in 2019 and started taking investments and placing debt financing. So affordable financing where we've tried to keep the interest rate really low. And we do a lot of support, business support, promotion of the clients. It's also, because we're a nonprofit, we use a community bond model, which means that we're creating, as in terms of this forum, we're creating one of the models that's there for everybody to start thinking differently about what their money does, because you don't have to be an accredited investor to invest in the fund. From the point of view of the community and the place-based question, this is. I was thinking, to me it's so core to what I've been doing for 30 years. I was trying to think of how to bring this down to sort of the basics. But one reason investing in local food and agriculture is so important is because this is a place that we can really take back the community economics. They're often co-ops, they're often community owned. We can mobilize local community investment, and they're often very engaged with the community. And in fact, the Fair Finance Fund, when we're looking at an application for funding, we actually rate them. Quite a bit of the assessment has to do with, are they networked in the community? Are they able to show that the community is part of it? I mean, are they governed by the community? Are they providing expertise and training? And then the impact measurement that we do is actually not just, we look at local sales and local jobs, we also look at local procurement by the client. And that's because overall, what we're trying to do is to build resilient, decentralized food economies. And that means that these farmers and entrepreneurs should be buying locally. They should be going to the vets locally. They should be using local, right? So if somebody is focused on export or importing most of their ingredients, that doesn't fit what we're trying to do. We're trying to build strong regional economies. Food and agriculture is, and I think you sort of mentioned multipliers, but food and agriculture actually commands 2 to 3 times multipliers, which means that when food dollars are spent in a local food business, they tend to stay in the community and they go on to other things in the community rather than exiting to Arkansas, like that. Um, so that's kind of the overview to give you a quick idea of where we are. So since 2019, I'm very proud to say we've supported 40 clients. We've issued over 3 million now in loans. And we've raised a little over 3 million in assets under management. That works because every time we get somebody starts paying back the principal, we give it to somebody else. So it's completely circular there. We also have about a third of our clients are BIPOC, and about 60% are women entrepreneurs. So, and to me, this is important to recognize that these are people who face additional barriers in getting capital, and they are the people who are making this new, sustainable, strong agriculture. So, super important. As far as social finance goes, I may not need to say this to this group, but I will say it again. In terms of the Fair Finance Fund, we believe that the fact that these businesses are embedded in community owned, community engaged, is what makes them successful and makes them a good investment. So it's not, it's not like us giving up stuff to do this. I'm like, this is the best place to put your money. Really happy about it. And again, in the bigger picture, it's better for the economies in Canada. So a couple of examples. We have we invested in a young farmer up near Ottawa called Vintage Soil. She farms entirely with horses. She had been working as a farm manager and working on different farms for about 5 years, and finally got her own piece of land, and started to invest in building her own business, Vintage Soil. And we were able to extend what she needed to get started and get the equipment for being sort of more permanently in one place. And what's amazing about her, if you know anything about agriculture, you know that the margins are very, very tight. She is committed to providing living wage jobs, and she's doing it. And we get impact metrics back from our clients every year, and we can see that she's actually done exactly what she said she was going to do. Another one. Because you're talking about the North, I was going to bring up Eat the Fish. Eat the Fish is in Thunder Bay, an amazing organization that had created the sort of basic facility. This is the part that we invested in, was the being able to fillet the fish and sort of prepare it for packaging and shipping to different markets. But they're buying from indigenous fishers as far north as Naujaat. So they're aggregating in a way that each of these fishers couldn't sell to these markets on their own, but because Eat the Fish is aggregating, they're able to move it commercially, regionally. So I think, look at the time, I'll just mention one thing, because the community bonds, I think, is important for thinking about the change we need to make in social finance, and community bonds is one of the ways that we can open up a broader engagement in wealth allocation. And we've had so many people who said they were so grateful to be able to invest in us because they could finally invest with their beliefs and their values. And they know what we're doing because we tell them all the time about all the people that we've invested in. So we're trying to, think of some of what you can do with community bonds is that you've really shortened that supply chain. Just like we try to do that in food, you're doing it in wealth too, right? So bringing investors in closer to understanding the impact of their dollars. So I'll pause. I know you've got questions, Ajmal, so I will turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Sally. I really appreciate it. So I would just invite the viewers to please propose your questions in the area in front of you. And my colleague Aditi will be taking a look for any questions. Do we see any yet? Or shall I start us with that? Okay. Well, I've got a good one. So One of the things that's extremely important when working in community is relationships. And relationships are really difficult to build. They're based on trust and connection, and oftentimes they take a long time to build. But both of you have been involved in so many projects. Stephen, with Power to Change, you've deployed over 106 million pounds to over 1,400 businesses across the country. And Sally, just starting out, over the past few years, already 3 million in loans with 40 clients in these communities. How do you do it? Like, how do you connect with the community and, come in with these new terminologies and tools and applications that they may not be familiar with to bring those things together and help them move forward with some of these projects? Feel free to jump in.
I mean, I can start. I mean, I think there's sort of two questions there, right? It was whether you're talking about engaging with the investors or the communities that we're funding. But I think it's communities that we're investing into that are sort of the interesting. And we actually, and this is sort of coming from my co-op background, we really structured the Fair Finance Fund in order to address that question. So from board to loan review committee to staff, we were looking for place-based experience and representation. And so to work in Northern Ontario, we've had people on the ground in the north, and we, before the pandemic, we were doing very sort of on the ground, in person, kitchen table events and things like that in order to help people understand what it was we were doing and why it was different, and all of that. And then I think what I think the Fair Finance Fund has really successfully brought to the table that I'm very proud of is that we have continued. So we have it like anybody, we have evaluation metrics. We have like 100 different metrics we'll look at to decide on clients, but a whole bunch of those have to do with whether or not they're engaged in the community, and whether they, and it's not just sort of asking them, but being able to look at their Facebook and stuff and just see, because to us having that network of, it's not just supporters and people who are buying from them, but people who are really deeply engaged in making sure they succeed. So it's like Stephen's examples of the pub and the football club, which I loved. I mean, these are things people really care about. So so we actually look for that, because to me that's a piece of what makes a business succeed. Whereas, and I think I go back to my co-op roots and say co-ops are there to serve the members' needs. Well, our clients are there to serve the community's needs, and so we want to test how much that is the case. I mean, and then the other piece of it is that being that engaged in the community means they have a network of expertise, and when they get into a place of struggle, which inevitably happens with any small or medium-sized business, they've got a big network to draw on to sort of work through that, including us, because we've stepped in lots of times to help people through tough times.
Yeah, I agree with everything Sally's said there. I think similar sort of dynamics have like played out in our work. So we often think about how we get out into the communities that we're trying to support, and often we will I guess work in partnership or alongside those communities. So it's really about sort of co-production and design, but also thinking about how we facilitate and broker peer networks as well, so that people are sort of connecting with others similar to themselves. I think Sally made the point around serving community needs, and that's certainly something we look at in terms of as we're trying to promote this work as a model, really thinking about how we align behind people's existing interests and their ambitions and their needs. So it's not us dictating what should happen, but really thinking about how we can best support them to realize what they would want to achieve. And then I think, Sally made the point around these organizations being able to draw on their then own networks and I guess social capital. And I think that's sort of how we think about this as well, in terms of a network-based approach to both supporting organizations, but also connecting them with potential investors and other funders and supporters. But really thinking about how those networks are, I guess, embodied with sort of mutual trust and respect, but also reciprocity, so that it's not an extractive process, but it's mutually beneficial process. And all of that, I think, helps sort of build this more sort of collaborative and supportive relationship.
Can I add an example?
Please.
One of my favorite example of this is a co-op that we invested in called the Black River Co-op. It was a land-based co-op, so it was a bunch of sort of land-based businesses that were all in a co-op together and stewarding the land together. But we always use 2 custom impact metrics that we just could develop with the client. And in this case, the person I was working with, Mike DeGagna, started to talk about how important reciprocity was. This is what made me think of this. So I said, well, I've always wanted to hear a farmer actually track the barter, because bartering is so essential in an agricultural community. And it's one of the problems of having these agricultural communities broken up with non-farmers, because there's so much work that goes on across the hedgerows. So I said, why don't you track that and make that one of your metrics? And he did it, it was fascinating. He created a spreadsheet that also showed it in monetary terms, that they had offset 70,000 by trading. So the value of 70,000 that they would have had to spend if they'd had to just buy it on the market, that they did it by trading their expertise with other people. It was an impressive, impressive proof there, I think.
Thank you so much. Aditi, we have a question.
Wow. So this question here is, how do your funds go about making sure your investments are making good qualitative impacts and not only good quantitative goals of impact?
I can't hear Aditi.
Yeah, your speaker's not working very well. You said, okay, here we go. How do your funds go about making sure your investments are making good qualitative impacts and not only hitting the quantitative goals of impact metrics? Stephen, maybe we could start with you.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because so part of what my team at Power to Change oversees both, I guess, the sort of grant funding and investment work, but also our research and evaluation work. So this is something we sort of look at quite a bit. In terms of the sort of good qualitative impacts, I think this is a sort of interesting question, because I guess the approach that we've adopted, which I described earlier, is that we're sort of led to a large extent by the needs and ambitions of the individual communities, and they really have the best understanding about the change that they're trying to facilitate within their local community. And what we try and do is help them understand whether or not that change is occurring, and if it's happening in a way they expected, and if it is, what contributed to that, and if it isn't, what might they do differently. We are quite, I guess, maybe a bit more relaxed than other types of funders around prescribing those types of impacts. So we wouldn't necessarily pin a value judgment to them about whether they were the sort of right type of impact. So, for example, it might be that an organization had come to us and said, actually, we want to run a luncheon club for older people within our community because we want to reduce social isolation or what have you. And in that process, they end up, hopefully they do contribute to reducing social isolation, but in that process, they create a range of other outcomes, such as, new volunteering opportunities or improving physical fitness or what have you. We would still see those as positive developments. But we do also we have placed quite a strong emphasis on sort of quantitative measurement as well, but partly because that's been a bit of a gap in the UK in terms of demonstrating the value of this type of work in a way that is understood by other investors and funders, but particularly also policymakers too. So we do sort of apply that broad methodological approach, I guess. But Sally, it sounds like you've got loads of great examples in terms of how you've approached it from a metrics perspective. The bartering one's great.
We have tried to sort of challenge the assumption that I think pushes you towards quantitative metrics. So we track 3 quantitative metrics that sort of fit into what I was talking about, the community economic development. But the 2 custom metrics are often I basically look at it as multi-year storytelling. So they report to us in the form of a text. Lots. And then we pick up photos. We do site visits every year, and so there's and we have thought a lot about how how you sort of make a storytelling report. Besides the fact that we do an impact report where people can see how all the different clients are doing and hear the latest. But I think I would give a note here for people to check out Raven Capital, because they have taken, I think, that way of addressing storytelling as a metric to another level that we're not big enough to do that yet. But I've definitely, as I've watched what you all have done, I watch Raven Capital and work to apply it to what we're doing.
Thank you. And maybe with your final words, Stephen, it would be great for you to maybe give some advice or words of wisdom from what you've seen over the past few decades in your place-based investing ecosystem, and maybe some advice on how you navigate stewarding these systems changes when you come up against pushback and backlash from folks trying to sustain the conventional systems.
Good. Yeah, good. Good meaty questions. Now, yeah. So I guess to sort of, summarize the points I made earlier, but also, I guess, sort of turn that into potential nuggets of advice. I think, like, one of the key things for us, and where also I've seen this be successful longer term. So, talked about the sort of regional imbalances or discrepancies within the UK between different areas, and also this concentration of power. And the UK, this has been a long-standing problem, and the UK has been trying to address it for decades, and often it's been through top-down government-implemented initiatives, and they've had a moderate degree of success, but it hasn't necessarily been sustained. And partly the reason for that is because it hasn't been owned by the local community. It hasn't been like driven by them, guided by them, formed by them. And there are lots of examples of other place-based initiatives which have been generated and governed and overseen by local communities, or at least involve them in the decision-making process more, which contributes to that longer-term investment. So that'd be one piece of advice, is really, if you're a social investor or a funder or what have you, thinking about taking place-based approaches, really working with and alongside the communities that you're trying to support, so that they feel long-term ownership over this. And then the sort of second point is around the long term as well. So too often, sometimes these interventions can be maybe a bit too short term, given the nature of the challenges they're trying to address. Lots of countries facing lots of complex challenges at the moment, they're not going to be fixed with like 5-year projects. It needs to be much longer than that. And so that long-term investment in place is one way of sort of addressing or contributing to that. And then, the final thing for us is really thinking about the additional added value of every pound we spend, I guess, and thinking about how we help leverage in additional resources and investment and funding alongside ours into the communities in which we work. And that's what, either us facilitating that additional leverage, or it's supporting those communities to do that, as I sort of described through the community shares model earlier. But again, I think that's all also going to contribute to the long-term success of these interventions. So yeah, so hopefully that's helpful.
It is indeed. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the both of you for your time. I'm sure our viewers, who I can't see, have enjoyed this profusely. It's a great start to a conversation, and this conversation is going to continue. And I think the lessons in relationships and taking advantage of how we come together with community and starting there before we combine it with the tools is the real takeaway here. And we can't use the old ways, the old models. We can bring forth new systems, new approaches. And actually, sometimes the new approaches are very old, traditional ways of going about things. And so really excited about the innovation in this space. And thank you both for your time. We really appreciate it. And I'm sure people will be approaching you after this session as well. And thank you for all the viewers' patience. As I mentioned at the beginning, it happened as it was supposed to happen. So enjoy the rest of your conference. And yeah, let's make Canada's social finance ecosystem the best in the world. Sorry, Stephen.
Awesome. Thank you for having
Great.
us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Great to see you all.
Yeah, likewise.